Hello everyone, and welcome to the August edition of the Ramsay Hospital Research Foundation's webinar series. Today we have some wonderful people here from GRMF talking to us about from service to civilian life reintegration training program for Australian ex-service personnel. And before I introduce you to them, I just want to do an acknowledgement of country, and I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. And I'm sure we're joining from many different lands today. So welcome to everyone. And importantly, welcome to our special guests who are with us today. So first of all, we have Dr Madeline Romaniuk. She's a clinical psychologist, an honorary associate professor at the University of Queensland, and a principal investigator at the Gallipoli Medical Research Foundation. So Madeline is going to do a presentation for us soon, but she also has some colleagues in another room sitting there, very lovely and nice. We have Miss Kelly Brown, who's a psychologist who currently works as both a research officer and a psychologist at Gallipoli Medical Research Foundation. Give us a wave, Kelly. And then we also have Karen Lochran. She's a senior clinician and an occupational therapist at Greenslopes Private Hospital in the Keith Payne unit. And Karen is going to say hi too. All right, enough from me. I'm not the reason why we're here. I'm going to turn off my camera and ask Madeline to give her presentation. Thank you.
All right. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you, Lena, for the introduction. So today I'm going to be discussing a project that I'm leading at the Gallipoli Medical Research Foundation in collaboration with the clinical team at the Keith Payne unit at Greenslopes Private Hospital, and funded, of course, by the Ramsay Hospital Research Foundation. So the project is currently underway, and it's essentially a pilot of a psychological group program for veterans, and it's titled Feasibility, Acceptability and Initial Outcomes of a Psychological Adjustment and Reintegration Training Program for Ex-Service Personnel. So I want to start by, I guess, giving a snapshot of why we need a program like this. A number of really important studies regarding the mental health of current and former serving ADF personnel have been released by the government over the past few years. Here's 3 of them. And they demonstrate really that the transition process could be considered quite a significant health issue, given the concerning findings regarding the mental health of ADF veterans. So for instance, some of the key findings have been that a member's rate of mental health condition almost doubles from when they are in service to when they are out of service. Also that an estimated 46% of ADF members who transition from full-time service back to the community will develop a mental health condition within the first 5 years of being out. And in relation to suicide risk, the suicide risk rates are actually significantly lower while people are serving in the ADF, but then become significantly higher for veterans once they leave when compared to the general Australian population. Our own research has also shown that 78% of veterans report experiencing a difficult transition, and also 50% report that they feel they have not reintegrated or adjusted back to civilian life, and on average, our sample was on average 10 years post-discharge. So clearly the need is there. So how did we then develop this program initially, and what is the research, excuse me, sorry, that is informing its development? For the past 7 years, I've been leading the Service to Civilian Life Research Program, which has predominantly been funded by RSL Queensland. It's progressed through a number of phases with the overarching aim of investigating the transition experience, developing an understanding of those factors that do contribute to a successful or challenging transition, and of course then translating this knowledge into tools and interventions to better support those who do struggle to adjust to life after service. Phase 1 was a qualitative investigation, and given the deficit of research in Australia at transition at the time we started this work, it was really important and necessary to start with a qualitative study, and in particular study with a phenomenology framework, which is the study of lived experience. This phase included interviews and focus groups with 100 participants, of course, including veterans and their partners who had actually been through transition and attempted to go through that reintegration to the community process. The participants were from a range of service corps and ranks and also lengths of service. And it was the first study of its kind to be conducted in Australia and one of the largest qualitative studies to be conducted on transition globally. Phase 2 was a systematic literature review of the international research examining psychological adjustment post-service. Phase 3 was a quantitative study with 725 ex-serving personnel, and this helped us determine an empirical model of adjustment and reintegration through factor analysis. And phase 4 is ongoing currently, and it's also a quantitative study with current serving personnel and is actually tracking members before and after they separate. So collectively, this body of work did address a considerable gap in the knowledge that we had in Australia at the time, and also provided us some indication of why those risk of mental health conditions and suicide do increase after service. It allowed us to identify those factors that do lead to a successful transition, as well as the latent variables that contribute most to psychological adjustment, which importantly then allows us to do something about these issues. So what did we find across these studies? We found that the adjustment process is really characterized by a profound sense of loss in 3 key areas: loss of culture and community, loss of identity, and loss of purpose. And that successful transition is unlikely if members aren't able to resolve or mitigate some of these losses. And these findings were recently quoted and referenced in the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide Interim report. We also found a number of common themes across participants in relation to their experiences of transition. And a crucial part of this work was really to try and learn from those who adjust well and to identify some of those themes that might be then useful in supporting those who struggle better. And the qualitative study gave us these initial themes and more, and certainly a clear pattern did develop among those who adjusted well versus those who did not. And from these findings, I then started to really conceptualize these patterns as a bit like risk and protective factors, where just like in health conditions, the more risk factors you tick off and fewer protective factors, the more likely you are to have a particular outcome. And in this case, the outcome is, of course, successful or problematic reintegration and adjustment. This then led to the development of a psychometric assessment tool called the Military Civilian Adjustment and Reintegration Measure, or the MCARM for short. So I did this by constructing a series of survey questions based upon those common themes, which were subsequently rigorously tested and refined as part of phase 3 of the research. So we were able to empirically test which of those initial qualitative themes were the most crucial and build this model of psychological adjustment and cultural reintegration through factor analysis and structural equation modeling. So taking a closer look at what those key factors are now. So first of all, finding purpose, fulfillment, and achievement, and engaging in meaningful activity, establishing civilian friendships and social connections outside of the military, attitudes towards seeking help for health and mental health difficulties, as well as knowledge about accessing professional support, and also the propensity to ask for help if you need it. Unresolved resentment and regrets about service, including feelings of animosity towards defence and the experience of service and separation in general. Negative beliefs about civilians, including perceptions about the values and behaviours of civilians and general society, including their attitudes towards and treatment of defence personnel. And finally, regimentation, meaning flexibility and adaptability to change, particularly with regard to routines or in response to other people's behaviours, as well as retention of problematic military habits. So of all those initial themes generated, these were the ones that contribute most to adjustment and reintegration. And this then formed the basis of the manualised group training program that we developed. So a closer look now at the program aims and outline. There are 8 session topics which specifically target those MCALM factors. The sessions include social connection, communication skills for civilian life, finding purpose, identity, beliefs about civilians, resentment and regret, regimentation, and help seeking. The overall aim of this program is to highlight psychological and cultural aspects that might be hindering participants' adjustment to civilian life. And ideally, what we want is participants to leave the program considering that these aspects are just as important to their health and well-being as their clinical symptoms might be. So this program really aims to validate that common veteran experience, but also build insight into the individual and particular challenges of adjusting to civilian life that each participant might have, as well as providing those some practical first steps to facilitate stronger adjustment. The intention certainly is not that these topics or issues in this program will find a complete resolution within the program. If we think about the topics of things like purpose and identity, these are quite profound experiences for all of us, but particularly that are challenging for veterans. And as you can imagine, a one-off 2.5 hour session is not going to necessarily solve or resolve any issues within that. So what we are really focusing on is building awareness, building insight, getting people into that place of readiness for change, and also a place with which to continue more in-depth work on the topics one-on-one with a mental health provider. As I mentioned, the use of lived experience rather than clinical expertise has heavily informed this program, particularly the psychoeducation and contextual background of each of the session topics. So this means that facilitators don't take on that role of the expert in these sessions. Instead, they are viewing participants as the experts in these experiences. And as part of that, the facilitators are really encouraged to take the position of reflecting back and checking in if the experiences, for instance, related to this idea of purpose or identity, hold true for the group, and most importantly, allowing room for correction or enrichment of that background content that is in the manual and the program. The program also utilizes a strength-based recovery framework, which again honors that lived experience of participants, and it's really person-centered content that we want to focus on strengths as well as promote hopefulness, autonomy, and self-determination. It also includes evidence-based techniques which are grounded in cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, as well as acceptance and commitment therapy. The target population, well, this program has been designed for ex-serving defence personnel who have been separated from defence really for any length of time. It's really for those who identify that they have difficulty adjusting to civilian life. The program is non-tertiary, so it is not designed to target complex psychiatric conditions. In fact, there isn't a requirement to have a current psychiatric diagnosis to attend or participate or potentially benefit from this program. So the best indication of relevance for the program is really the results of the MCARM measure. So we use the MCARM measure as a screening tool for eligibility and relevance and suitability. And if potential participants are indicating that they have 3 or more of those factors, or that are demonstrating 3 or more areas of need on those factors, as well as self-reporting that they are having difficulties adjusting, and that is the best indication that this program would be suitable and relevant. So moving now to the actual study pilot methodology. The aims of the pilot are to determine the feasibility of the program, including demand, implementation, and integration, determine the acceptability, including affective attitude, burden or discomfort, and perceived effectiveness, determine the initial psychosocial outcomes of the program, and we are doing that through the use of the assessment measures listed. So obviously the MCARM, the quality of life enjoyment and satisfaction questionnaire, the depression and anxiety stress scale, and the PTSD checklist for DSM-5. And finally, we are also having a look at participant preferences and uptake of an online versus an in-person booster or follow-up session 3 months following the conclusion of the program. So the pilot study, of course, has been approved by Defence and Veteran Affairs Human Research Ethics Committee. What we are requiring of participants is that they attend 8 weekly group sessions. They are 2.5 hours per week. That does not include the study specific measures, which is sort of on top of that time commitment. They complete outcome measures at week 1, week 8, and 3 months post program to allow analysis of the pre, post, and follow-up time points. And they also complete a more qualitative program feedback questionnaire at the week 8 point and also at follow-up. Program facilitators also complete some study-specific measures and commitments. So they, of course, attend some facilitator training. They engage in weekly clinical supervisions while the program is running. They complete facilitator session adherence checklists after each session, and also at the end of each iteration of the program, they complete a written facilitator feedback questionnaire. Looking now at the elements of collaboration and co-design of this project. So the program is actually run out of the day centre of the Keith Payne unit, or KPU, at Green Slopes Private Hospital, as mentioned. This is the KPU clinical team, which is led by Karen Lochran. So we have Karen, we have Anne Wilkie, Sally Anderson, James Halpin, and Jess Ogden. As you can see, they are a multidisciplinary team, and as well as providing the co-facilitation. So we have one facilitator from Gallipoli Medical Research, which of course is Kelly Brown, who is with us today. And we have always one facilitator from the Keith Payne unit. So they have made a significant contribution to this project. And as well as the facilitation, it's generating referrals, screening, clinical follow-up of participants, weekly clinical supervision, as well as weekly preparation, and of course the completion of those questionnaires and paperwork. So we are so incredibly grateful for their engagement and the collaboration that they have given us, as well as the interest in this project, which really has made this study possible. In terms of co-design from KPU facilitators and participants, there are multiple points at which feedback is gathered around the program content, the manual, which is integrated back into the program. So at facilitator training, there is the opportunity to provide that initial feedback of the program overall in each session. We then have weekly verbal feedback, gathering and suggestions during supervision to improve the session content each week following the delivery of the sessions. We have written individual feedback at the conclusion of each program, And we will be doing a final study team focus group where the whole team is going to be discussing the feasibility and acceptability elements and recommendations for future delivery. The veteran participants also provide feedback, which is integrated into the revisions of the program. And to date, I think we've seen that all material has been incredibly relevant for this group, the cohort at the Keith Payne unit, but certainly the content has been quite challenging for them. And typically, I think they're reporting that it is possibly more challenging than they had anticipated prior to joining the groups. So the program content is revised with all this feedback integrated after each group. We're currently on version 5 of the program manual, which demonstrates, I suppose, the amount of revisions that have occurred using the input from facilitators and participants. So looking a little bit now at the interim findings, I mean, we are still in the thick of this study. So I do caveat by saying they are interim findings because they may change, and also I'm just providing a very brief snapshot today. But what we are seeing so far is we have had 20 participants that have completed the program. From week 1 to week 8, we are seeing a significant improvement in total MCALM scores. So on average, the increase is about 10 points. In terms of interpretation, higher scores, the higher scores, the better on the MCALM. So higher scores do indicate stronger adjustment. So that's potentially looking promising. We also ask participants some self-report questions. We ask, do you think your adjustment has improved as a result of the program? They indicate that on a scale of 1 to 5. And we ask obviously the same question in relation to reintegration. And as you can see, for each of the groups so far, they're hovering around just below that 4 mark. I think on average, it comes out as a 3.7 out of 5. So certainly we're seeing some levels of self-reported improvement there. And finally, we do ask the question, would you recommend this program to another veteran? And so far, as I said, of the 20 that have participated, 100% have reported that yes, they would recommend the program. So for our next steps of this study, of course, we still need to deliver the final program and complete follow-up data collection. We will be conducting the research and clinical team focus group. We then will conduct a final analysis and report with recommendations for future program implementation and potential scalability, as well as recommendations for future directions for research. So just to acknowledge before we move to the panel, of course, the study participants with which none of this research or knowledge that we gain would be possible without their commitment and contribution. Of course, our funding partners, Ramsay Hospital Research Foundation and the Keith Payne unit and the amazing team there. And that's it from me. So I will hand back over to Lena now. Just
wonderful, thank you. And while we're getting the panel online, I'll just remind everyone that today's session is being recorded, so you will be able to look online next week and find it, but also share it with other people who you think might be interested in it. And also just to remind everyone that we are taking questions through the Q&A down at the bottom of the screen. And in fact, we already have a couple of questions. So I might go to those first. And the first one was a sort of a technical question. Was there any, so first of all, the interim results look really promising. And I love seeing a graph where there's a lot of 1 bar and a 0 of nothing. You don't see those sorts of graphs very often, so that's a really promising result. So the first question that someone's asked is, and I didn't see whether you had a gender you've captured gender or reported that, but is there any difference between male and female veterans, and you know, is there one gender that's represented, and do they, you know, do they approach it very differently?
I'll just do a quick answer on more the stats side, and then I'll throw to Kelly and Karen. But we don't have enough female participants to
Sure.
do any sort of analysis like that. I believe do you want to jump in, Kelly, around the?
We've had quite a mix of participants in terms of age and the type of service, length of service. It has been predominantly male participants. So I think not really able to comment too much on specific gender differences, probably outside of just needing to be aware of, when we're sharing the lived experience element of each topic, that making sure we're aware of that gender difference in lived experience, so that we've allowed for group discussion to talk about how it might have been different for those female participants through their time in service. What were some of the unique challenges that they experienced? So, for example, thinking about when we were exploring social connectedness and what that's felt like in defence, that's brought up some unique experiences for different genders, but on whole, not really significant gender differences to share. Yeah.
I might just add, I have done some in terms of the not this program part specifically, but I did do some sort of analysis looking at the differences of gender in that earlier research, so that the work that led up to this, and actually there weren't any major significant differences that we found in relation to those experiences, and certainly not those factors. So in terms of the relevance overall of those factors, I think they are pretty kind of in line despite gender, I suppose. But I think in terms of veteran research generally, there is a need to almost over-represent women going forward, because obviously women make up only around 20% of the Defence Forces, and we've been pretty accurate in our representation of women to date. But I think what it shows is for us to actually learn more and to unpack their experiences better, we would almost need to over-represent them in order to be able to conduct some of those fine-tuning analyses that are only possible with a large sample size.
Yeah, okay, that's great. There's another question on the Q&A, which is also about subgroup analysis. So I think I'll jump to that one next. And so the question is, are you planning any subgroup analysis for those with pre-existing conditions? So again, I understand it's a small project, but you know, is that a future plan?
Well, I guess, again, we're limited by the sample. Unfortunately, we've only got 20 participants to date, and it looks like we'll probably only have around 25 in total. So we can't really burrow down too much. But also I'll say, just on in terms of the pre-existing conditions, because the all participants of this program have been referred through the Keith Payne unit, then all of them do have, although the program itself does not target mental health conditions, but all of them will have a pre-existing mental health condition. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and look, we haven't mentioned it, but I know COVID has really impacted on your ability to recruit and you know, and to hold those sessions. So another
COVID impact. I mean, I think, Karen, I'm not sure what your thoughts are on the recruitment side or the general interest regarding the impact of COVID. It was more so on the ability to just to get the size, I suppose. So we were limited around just the practicalities of size. I'm not sure if COVID impacted on the general recruitment success or the interest, but certainly just the practicalities of running it.
Yeah. Karen, Kelly, did you want to make a comment about that?
Just to concur with that, I do think it was more about we were limited with the numbers we could have in group rooms for safe social distancing. But that was actually quite beneficial in some respects for the first programs to have smaller numbers, which is a consideration as well in terms of the program content.
Right. So I think what I'm hearing is that COVID might have been useful, which I hear very often. So I guess there's another, so got quite a few questions. So another one is, have there been, so again, acknowledging that, you know, the project isn't finished, but are there any aspects of the program that you can share? Have there been attitudes, and I can see that, you know, there's big attitudes and difference between before and after, but are there any differences between the attitudes before starting the program and after that you can share with us, you know, not non-scientifically, I guess?
I think I'll throw to you guys just in terms maybe of just more observations you've noticed, because of course we haven't really looked at the analysis too closely yet. But I'm wondering if there's any observations you've noticed or any feedback you're getting potentially in those booster follow-ups, where are participants reporting anything in particular that you can share?
I think reflecting what are some sort of the overall shifts that we might notice comes back to a sense of, I think, openness and some of those small shifts in insight. I'd say there can be a tendency maybe towards the start of the program, a sense of really relating to the topics as being areas of challenge or issue. But over the course of the program, where we touch on more self-reflections, getting them to think of how relevant it is for them personally, how do these areas or challenges show up in their day-to-day life right now, that maybe there's a sense of a general more awareness of, oh, okay, well, maybe there's more that I can personally take control of and do to help right now, sort of a bit of a shift away from, say frustrations or externalizing some challenges into taking more accountability and that self-determination, sort of going forward, that hopefulness for what's next.
I think it was just a good opportunity to check in on progress as well, in terms of the implementation of the learning and skills that they may have been introduced to in the program, but also the peer support that came from attending a follow-up. That's always a benefit in terms of group programs.
Yeah, it was a highlight of the in-person boosters that we've had.
Okay. All right. So I think just reminding everyone, so if you do have a question, you do need to pop it into the Q&A, which requires typing. We can't do any verbal questions today, unfortunately, technology. Madeline, I just wanted to know, so this is the first a pilot project, first in Australia. I'm guessing that there may have been similar work done in America, a very large group, maybe in the UK as well. So what has happened internationally, and you know, do you have future plans to sort of roll this out beyond what you're doing right now?
That's a good question. So I think quite rightly, as you suggest, that there has been a decent amount of research and work that has been done in relation to understanding how defence and military culture might impact on members' ability to transition and reintegrate back into civilian life. And a lot of that research, as you said, is coming out of the US, Canada, and UK. I think there's less so looking more at the psychological adjustment side of it, but I think there is potential for this work to be expanded and taken internationally. We have the first step to doing that, though, obviously when you're talking and thinking about culture, you cannot make the assumption that these sort of factors that are relevant for an ADF service personnel, Australian obviously, are going to be translated exactly into other cultures and countries. So the first step with doing any type of expansion work would be to look at validating those factors in other cohorts. And we are actually in talks in relation to doing this both with a UK and a US cohort. So once we sort of determine, are these factors the same? Are they valid? Are they as relevant for these other cultures? Then, of course, if the answer is yes, then of course we could then think about how a program like this might then be applicable for other countries and cultures. So first step is we need to know that these factors are actually relevant for other settings.
So there's one more question on the Q&A, which I just remembered, and I think it sort of nicely slots into here. So you did mention earlier that there'd been any government inquiry and that some of this research had been acknowledged. What is the general attitude of the ADF towards the program? Are they aware of it? Are they enthused by it?
Yeah.
What's the attitude?
Yes, I mean, I think absolutely there's sort of a positive, that they're aware of it. It was before the Royal Commission. There was actually obviously the Interim Commissioner for Defence and Veteran Suicide conducted an inquiry as well, and as part of and that was Bernadette Voss, and part of her interim findings, she did talk about the development of the research at Gallipoli Medical Research Foundation, in particularly the measure, the MCAR measure, and the potential to roll out a program as part of that. So most certainly there is an awareness from Defence around this work that we're doing. We continue to inform them and have them kind of be up to date and aware of what the research is telling us sort of as it comes out. And I think there certainly is an interest there. It's just about finding, I guess, fine-tuning as the research progresses. We need to continually refine and fine-tune how these programs are delivered in the best way. I mean, this is what the pilot's all about. So I think Defence is interested in watching how these research studies unfold, and then sort of taking on board our recommendations on how they might be implemented in the future.
Okay, great. So Kelly and Karen have been sitting there very patiently. So I'm going to ask Kelly a question now. So can you tell us more about the psychological techniques and the strategies that were used in the program, and if they were adapted or modified for a veteran audience?
Certainly. So I think in Manny's presentation, she was sharing that this is based in a strengths-focused recovery framework, and the psychological sort of evidence-based techniques approaches cognitive behavioural therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy in particular. But I think how we've tailored this or modified this for a veteran-specific audience, one of the really important elements is that lived experience focus that we've included. So, for example, every session is typically structured to start with a focus on what that lived experience background is like, checking the relevance with our group participants, exploring that before presenting more, I guess, clinical psychoeducation, and then looking at some practical psychological strategies or activities that are either, I guess, group activities, written self-reflections, and looking at always a implementation or a practical practice goal. They could set that's personalised and appropriate to where they're at personally as well. So some of the, I guess, to look at a bit of an example of how that looks in practice, in our third session, when we explore the theme of purpose, we tend to start by exploring, well, what does purpose and meaning mean? Talking about what that, some of the common lived experience for veterans feeling a sense of loss of purpose or meaning on transition out of defence, and the challenges of finding a new sense of purpose and meaning in civilian life, before we explore some practical acceptance and commitment therapy strategies, like a version of a life values activity, and setting some values-based activity goals. So there's a variety of different strategies used throughout the different sessions, and including as part of the co-design and implementation process, we've worked to sort of adapt those even more. So looking at ways that we've added in extra relevant strategies into, so communications, acknowledging different communication strategies specific that we were hearing from the participants, as well as adding in more emotion regulation strategies around mindfulness, grounding, relaxation. Yeah. So I think that
covers it well.
Yeah.
So it's quite comprehensive.
Yeah.
I think so, yes.
Yeah. So moving on then, Karen. So what do you think the future implementation might look like? So I guess we've got two sort of questions. One is around, extending this program in particular, but I'm also interested to find out what you think how this program might fit into the suite of sort of outpatient projects that are happening at Greenslopes, and how that might work.
Sure. Well, I think I'd have to say yes, based on some of those interim findings where 20 out of 20 participants have identified that other veterans would benefit. So I think we need to consider that identified need within our population. But beyond that, I do certainly think that this particular program would complement our existing programs. So we currently have, I think it's 5 clinical day programs, one being a trauma recovery program, another an alcohol substance management, depression, anxiety and anger management programs. So we see there is quite a demand for those programs, with people attending the acute pain unit being referred by their treating psychiatrist. So it may be that we've seen the reintegration program itself has been a really good stepping stone into the group process at KPU while awaiting those other clinical programs.
Yeah,
that's really supported the health seeking component. The other end of it is we've seen benefit for people who have done some of those other clinical programs, then completing the reintegration program. So they've looked at some of their management of clinical symptoms and coping tools, and then felt ready and looking at the support that's provided, and then continuing with reintegration as a subsequent program. Again, ongoing help and support through the acute pain unit. Does that sound?
Yeah, I think that's a really great summary of that.
That's fantastic. I guess then, sort of Kelly, given the experience of facilitating the program, and perhaps Karen, you can answer this as well. Is there and you sort of said before that there was quite a range of different participants, and I know it's only 20 people, but is there a particular group that's really popping out to you that are more suitable for the program than others, or is it really the sort of program that's going to help anyone at any point? Karen, Karen, I'll ask you that first.
I think it's an interesting one for us. I'm keen to see the final results on this to give us more clearance. But observationally, we've noticed it does seem to be suitable and relevant for people regardless of what type of service or the length of their service or how recently they've discharged. And I think that's a really interesting point, that even if they've discharged in the last few years versus 20 plus years out of the military, that this is feeling like a relevant program for them. It is interesting that some of the participants sort of mentioned in their feedback to us that having this program earlier in their transition experience may have been helpful as well. But probably some big factors for program, suitability, and not too dissimilar from participating in general group therapy of programs, is that psychological readiness. I'd say it's pretty key. Yeah. So noticing those who were feeling ready, open, willing to explore how they're currently feeling and thinking in these areas, and be open to practicing different ways of adjusting or or changing made a difference. And with that timeliness as well, so recognising that over the course of the program there were lots of external stresses going on for the veteran community, but also looking at the participants themselves individually, those who had a lot of other stresses going on that impacted their ability to attend or be present or engage in the program or week to week, sort of between session practice. That was potentially less suitable for them just because of everything that's going on at the time. So probably maybe something we've observed is those who have more higher complexity or more acute presentations at the time who may have benefited from more tailored, like one-on-one support of these topics. But even those that come to mind that have still reported benefiting from the group discussion and being part of that peer support as well. Is there anything that you noticed from that?
No, I think you've covered it well. I do think by nature the Kids Pain Unit, it is a mental health unit. So as Maddie mentioned earlier, people attending are presenting for treatment and support with a mental health condition. So it is looking at the readiness for this particular program. But it's not unique. We see that for our other day programs as well, that they might be needing to address other aspects of their treatment through individual therapy or looking at addressing other psychosocial stresses that we can support with through community services.
Great. I mean, it seems to be a really useful program. A general question to the three of you now, and maybe I'll go back to Madeline first. I mean, the key highlights and the challenges of delivering the program. Highlights perhaps first, lowlights second, challenges second.
Look, this has been a major highlight for me personally, because it's a bit of a full circle moment for me. So I used to, before I embarked on research, and the last 8 years of this research, I actually was working as a clinical psychologist at the Keith Pain Unit, delivering some of the groups. And so this research was really sparked by my experience there and seeing that there was this need of supporting this idea of reintegration and adjustment better, and the fact that there was no research at the time. That sort of led me down this long pathway to research. And so to be able to come full circle and then work back at, with the Keith Pain Unit, the fantastic, incredible team there has been just a huge highlight for me. And really seeing this, I guess, the research come to life is the other aspect. So it's that real translation of outcomes that to me is just fundamental in any research we do. There has to be a purpose to it, and there has to be an application. And I think this is sort of the perfect example of translational research where it has that very practical application. So that's a huge highlight as well. Challenges, I suppose, there's just general challenges with any research project. There's always the participant recruitment challenges, but COVID threw up curly things there. But I guess, that's sort of part and parcel with what we're doing, and you sort of expect that. And luckily this is a pilot, so the actual sample size isn't sort of as important as more that co-design collaborative process in terms of testing out this material and making sure it's sort of fit for purpose. But yeah, so that's some of the challenges, but I'll hand over now to Kelly and Karen.
I might jump in with, I think one of the highlights that we've discussed in the program is the peer support, being able to hear the different diverse experiences of these different areas, adjustment areas come up, but also, I guess, that opportunity of really hearing the stories of people who've maybe gone a little bit further down their adjustment journey, that made some progress and gains, and hearing them offer those insights to the other group members. It's been quite an empowering space, I think, for that. And I guess the other side, the challenge side of that has been allowing enough time to have that group discussion and really have that group engagement for each session, noticing that 2.5 hours that we've got for this session is, I guess, shorter than other day programs that are offered. So that's been a challenge of just delivery of time, I'd say. What some of your highlights?
Highlights. Yes, the opportunity to work with Madeline and the team at GMRF and combining the research and clinical practice. The opportunity to give my team in trying a new program beyond their clinical role. But I suppose that's been the challenge, is that, within staffing and typical demands, this has been, an additional thing, which is exciting, but just juggling that within staffing and scheduling is something we would need to consider in terms of, future inclusion of this program.
Yeah. So my last question is going to be this one. Let's just say I had $1 million hanging around in my back pocket and I decided to give it to this program. What would you do? What would world domination look like?
I might say, this might be a super boring answer, but the researcher inside of me and the need for evidence base is that the pilot phase is really just the first step. There's a lot of work to be done on this program. This pilot has really given us so much information around what are the beneficial elements versus what are the challenging elements. So I think there's a lot of revision that needs to be done at the end of this pilot, and then following that, if you really want a genuine evidence base for a completely novel program, then you have to proceed through a controlled trial. So they are costly and they take a long time, and it would probably cost around that much to do a proper controlled trial of this program. So that's probably where we would go if we were to say that it was a fully evidence-based program.
Yeah. Awesome. I don't think we have any other questions on the Q&A, so I'm going to just give you an opportunity just to wrap up. So thank you so much, the three of you, for your time today. It's been a really interesting talk. There's obviously a lot of promise happening here, and hopefully you will find $1 million down the track for this. I'm just declaring it's not in my back pocket, so right now.
Thought maybe you were hinting at something
no.
there.
I don't have that kind of money. But look, thank you very much, the three of you. Any last comments or pieces of wisdom that you'd like to pass on before we wrap up? Karen, I'll go to you first.
I just think it's been an incredible opportunity, as I mentioned earlier. I think there's a lot of scope to consider it as, if the findings continue to be positive as a submission to DBA, and that would be up to Madeline and the team to support, whatever the findings are there. But also great scope from the topics that we've seen to develop even more programs. Communication skills is one example. It's a 2.5-hour session in the 8-week program, and I think we could develop a whole program from that as well. Yeah. So there's lots of opportunity to continue to meet the needs of the veteran population.
Wonderful, thank you. Kelly?
I just echo that, and also just acknowledge that it has been a really wonderful opportunity to collaborate with the key opinion unit staff, and their support and enthusiasm for the project has been invaluable and a real highlight of working on the project. I've learned a lot from working with the different facilitators as well. So just really grateful for that support and the opportunity that this is presented for the veteran community as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right.
Kelly, I must say, for being the facilitator who's participated in all 5 group programs.
Been a good journey.
That probably deserves a little badge itself. So, well, you're getting lots of applause online. So congratulations to all of you. Hopefully that it continues and that the program finishes very nicely. So thank you all, and this webinar will be available online next week if you need to see it again. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you next time.